Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. I have a special guest later on, and as billed, we're going to have a debate. So we're having someone on who's not a supporter of the family party, but would like to discuss some of our policies. So that's always something we're very keen to do, to engage in debate. I sometimes describe Scotland as the debate desert because it's so difficult to get people to debate. But we have someone tonight, so we can look forward to that. And we'll appreciate your comments as well while we're discussing issues. We're going to start off talking about non-binary issues, but we'll come to that in a minute. Right, what's been going on? What's been on our radar recently? Well, we're aware of a bit of a farmers' protest movement building up in the northeast of Scotland. This has happened in quite a few other countries in Europe. It tends to be suppressed a bit in the mainstream media. They don't really like to report what's going on. But there's a bit of unrest up in the northeast. So our man on location up there is going to be reporting on that. We'll put some things on social media before too long, but we're certainly interested in that issue. We had a good meeting in Fife yesterday. That was great. And we're going to be announcing our new appointments for chairman, deputy chairman, etc. very soon. So watch this space for that. On Saturday, probably some of you watching, we're at the Unite for Education conference in Glasgow. I spoke at it briefly as well. Unite for Education organisation bringing together people involved in Christian education, because there's a burgeoning Christian school movement in Scotland. You know that there's a few Christian schools already, but there's talk of a lot more being started, which is fantastic from my point of view. And also there are very significant numbers of parents decided to home educate their children. They've seen the offering at the government school down the road and thinking, nope, we're not going to put our child into that school. And so they're coming up with alternatives. Home education, also groups of parents clubbing together to form home education collectives, which I think is a fantastic thing. Because you know what's most difficult about home education? You know, you've got all those hours a day all on your own doing this. But if you can combine with other parents in the area, then one person could do some maths on a Monday morning, and then someone else do something else. So it's really very positive development. And from the conference, there seems to be so much happening. So I think we're at the beginning of, well, I don't know whether an explosion is the right word, but yeah, the graph certainly seems to be picking up in terms of specifically Christian education. So that was very, very encouraging. The major trip we've got lined up is up to Orkney and Thurso. So if you're anywhere in those areas, keep your eye open for those. That's one of our major trips. And one last thing to mention is Tuesday night next week. If you're in the southwest of Scotland, Ayrshire, Dumfries and Galloway, those sort of areas, then we're going to have an online meeting for that area. We've had some leadership changes in that area, in our branches. So we're going to try and get everyone together on Zoom. The area is so big. I mean, people in Dumfries, people in Ayr, you know, Newton Stewart, whatever. You know, these places are Stranraer. These places are a long way apart. So we're going to try to do it on Zoom. So if you are in the southwest of Scotland, do come on. If you haven't had the email about it or haven't seen it, then just drop us an email and we'll send you the link. It'd be great to see everyone there to have a meeting to try and plot a way forward in the southwest of Scotland. Right, here we go. Right, let's introduce our guest for this evening. Right, welcome, Brian Ross. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Brian, tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you and what you do? And what brings you here tonight?
I'm in lovely sunny Dundee, where the weather is beautiful and stormy outside, so apologies for any noise. And I live with my partner, my daughter and stepdaughter. Hello. I think they're watching just now. And yeah, I've got a pretty decent job, some fairly interesting hobbies as well. So yeah.
Tell us an interesting hobby.
My interest in hobbies, I've got a big collection of bonsai trees that I tend to all the year round. So that keeps me very busy, quite productive as well. And I've got a pet snake and 3 pet cats, so they take up a lot of my time. And that's pretty much me.
My only exploration in the world of bonsai was I once did a bonsai potato. Are you familiar?
Oh yeah,
with
they're
that?
always fun. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, you just get an old potato and you let it start sprouting. And if you sort of prune it, you can make the sprouts from it look like a bonsai tree. It's a bonsai potato, but I've never done the real thing. So, okay, right, very good. Very good. All right, do throw questions in tonight. Those of you watching will be interested in your comments and questions. Right, Brian was particularly interested in talking about, well, responding to a video I made about the Scottish Government's non-binary action plan, which I basically went through and, well, so slated it basically in lots of different ways. So Brian would like to come back on some of those points this evening. But I thought a good place to start would be to invite Brian to define non-binary for us. So how would you define non-binary?
So yeah, this is probably going to be quite a critical point. So I think if we get our definitions clear, then we'll be all good from there. So to differentiate between sex and gender, sex is the biological definition of male and female, and that particularly involves the ability to produce male and female gametes, male gametes being sperm, female gametes being eggs. And that's how we would define biological sex. Gender is something completely different. It's how we feel internally and how we express ourselves. And there are a small percentage, roughly 1% of the population, that identify as non-binary. And what that means is their gender expression doesn't conform to what we would ascribe as man and what we describe as woman. They fall somewhere in the middle, and it's on a spectrum. So you have people who are slap bang in the middle, can't tell male or female. They don't feel male or female. You have somebody that feels a bit more on the man's side or a bit more on the woman's side. But there are far more people on this side and this side that identify as man and woman. But there is that small percentage of people in the middle that identify as non-binary, and that's how I would define non-binary, and I think that's how the vast majority of people would define non-binary, including psychologists and sociologists and things and people of that kind.
Okay, so the concept of gender identity, how did that arise? I mean, it wasn't like discovered by someone, obviously, in a laboratory. How did it arise, do you think?
It's been around for time immemorial. You look back at the Romans, you look back at the Greeks, there wasn't much of a gender definition there. While they did have people who were men and who were women, there were emperors, there were senators who lived quite openly as neither, or they were quite frankly trans. And the evidence in the history suggests all the way throughout different societies, and even in a lot of societies throughout the world today, I think there are a couple of dozen societies that officially recognize a third gender. So
as far as you're concerned, gender identity just depends on what the person feels about themselves, and that's the end of the story.
Gender expression is something that the way that we present ourselves, and their internal feeling is your internal feelings. So that's how you feel about yourself. Are you a man? Or do you feel comfortable identifying as a man? Yeah, then you're a man. Fantastic. Are you a woman? You are biologically a woman, you express yourself as a woman, great. But there are a small percentage of people who don't identify either way, and they fall somewhere in the non-binary, which is in between the binary of male and female.
Yeah. So this concept of gender identity, its reality is purely subjective. It's purely determined by the belief of that the person is expressing about themselves. Now, my question I've got about them. So if this, and it results, as far as you're concerned, in determining whether the person is a man or a woman. Now, also the terms men and women, those terms also apply to biological sex. So haven't we got a recipe for total confusion here when we're using the same words for two different things?
Okay, so that's why I mean to differentiate between biological sex and gender. Biological sex is male and female. Gender is man, women, and other.
Right,
and
so male and female,
in biology as well. In biology, you could have a third gender. There are people who are born intersex, and that's officially recognised as a genuine medical condition that affects a small percentage of people.
So the problem I've got here is male and female, man and woman. I don't think anyone's got the right to decide that they mean something different than they're generally taken to mean in ordinary usage. So the idea of there being male and female is something that can be unrelated to being a man and a woman. I mean, inevitably, that's just going to cause huge confusion, isn't it? Because it's taking terminology that has been taken to refer to biological sex since time immemorial, and it's now deciding that some of that language actually means something completely different. I think inevitably, is that not a recipe for confusion?
Not at all, not one bit. And it's a recipe for a lack of confusion, because you have the man and woman strict binary. Then what about the people who are trans, who live in societies that have a strict enforced binary? Now, those people, and if you speak to them, they will tell you, I have never felt like a man, or I have never felt like a woman. I've always felt trapped inside a body that isn't mine. This gender identity, as in what you're assigned at birth, that was given to you by a doctor based on your genitals.
So just to clarify, you think there's such a thing as a male woman?
In what sense? Sorry, I think you're...
Well, because you said male and female relate to biological sex, but man and woman relate to gender identity.
Yeah,
therefore,
okay,
it's possible to have a male woman.
Yes, you could have somebody that was born male but who identifies as a woman, and that person is a trans woman. That's the definition right there.
So the definition of a trans woman is a male woman.
The definition of a trans woman is a person who was assigned male at birth but who identifies and expresses themselves as a woman.
But they're still male, aren't they? So they're a male woman.
Biologically male, yes.
Yeah, so they're a male woman.
In every other sense,
there's male women. There's male women and female men.
If that's the way you want to put it, it's not how I would put it, but if that's the way you want to put it, then yeah. And if you speak to a trans person, they would say, I was assigned this gender at birth, but my internal...
The reason I put it that way...
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I put it that way is, I mean, to be honest, because I think it makes it sound a bit ridiculous that there's male women and female men. I think that exposes the way that this just is just a jumble of contradictions to me.
So to you and other people that think like you, it causes confusion, so therefore it shouldn't exist. Because there are people out there, and there are people out there who are trans and who are non-binary, because those people just want to say, hi, we exist, we just want to express ourselves in the way that we feel, and you want to stop that because it confuses you.
Okay, let's go back to this concept of gender identity. Because gender identity...
if you could answer that question, Richard, because it is an important question.
Okay. Ask the question again.
You don't feel comfortable about men who transition to women, and you don't feel comfortable about women transitioning to men because that's how they express themselves. And that causes confusion for you. And that doesn't quite compute with you, and it makes you feel something, disgust, anger, whatever it makes you feel. And because of that, you think that those people should just have to live with the gender they were assigned at birth. Yeah?
No, it's not a matter of feeling uncomfortable, because the concept of gender identity is, I mean, gender identity it's not a scientific thing, because it's a subjective thing. It's something that's been invented by people. It's a social construct. This idea that you can have something called a gender identity, and it's whatever you choose it to be. So that's something that's been made up by people. Now, according to the definition of gender identity that people have made up and that you believe, then obviously whatever someone chooses as a gender identity is their gender identity. Now, to ask the question, is it really their gender identity? Well, that question doesn't really have much meaning, because these words have just been defined by people. So you can't do an experiment to find out if it really is their gender identity. It's like saying, my definition of a car is something with four wheels you can drive around in, or it's something with a sail on that goes in a lake and goes over the water. So in other words, I could look at a boat, I could say that's a car by my definition. And there's no point in saying, let's take it to the laboratory, let's take it to bits and see if it's a car or a boat. The problem is the definition. So it's not scientific. So this idea of gender identity has been concocted by people. So the question whether or not it's real or not isn't really a helpful question. I think the helpful question is, is this concept helpful to people? So in terms of people living their lives, if they adopt this ideology, this philosophy, that there's such a thing as gender identity, you can choose it to be whatever you want to, does that tend to people living flourishing lives? I would suggest all the evidence is that it doesn't lead to that. It tends to lead to problems. And I think part of the problem with that is this definition of gender identity being different than actual sex. Inevitably, that they get confused, and it amounts to someone trying to pretend that they're of a different sex. And in my view, trying to found your life on something that isn't true is not something that's going to work out well, which is why I believe that the outcomes for people who go down these alternative gender identity routes tend to be very negative.
So what exactly are you basing that on? What problems does somebody living their life as their internal gender identity as how they feel, what problems does that cause?
The general picture is that transgender identities correlate with massive, very significant mental, physical health problems, addiction, relationship stability. Basically, pretty well anything you can measure doesn't tend to come out looking rosy for people who go down these alternative gender identity routes.
So people that live their lives as the gender identity that they feel, they are at a much higher risk of substance abuse and mental health problems. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
What are you basing that on?
That's now that question, what you base it on, it's not like one study. That's the general thing. I mean, like if you go to the NHS website.
No, Richard, sorry, you can't get away with saying something like that and say that's just the general thing. That's not how that would work. You need to tell people where you're getting this information from, because it is really critical information. If being transgender and living your life as a different gender than you were assigned at birth, and if living as non-binary leads to addiction issues, leads to mental health issues, leads to familial breakdowns, leads to all these problems that you say, where is any of this happening? When has it happened? And can you cite any sources to back up your claims here? Because if you can't, Richard, then you cannot make claims like that.
The most helpful sources are often LGBT campaigning groups, because they present this information and they present it under the banner of, look how poor the outcomes are for transgender people. This proves how discriminatory society is, and it proves, we need to get more funding, etc. So the organizations supporting this, that they present the problems associated with transgender identities, they're perfectly open about them. So it's no secret.
So, no, it's no secret that people who are trans and who are non-binary and who are LGBT are more susceptible to mental health issues, to substance abuse issues, to being more likely to get into abusive relationships. And the reason for that is because it's the way that society have treated these people in the past and continue to do so in the present. If you are gay and you live in a society that tells you you're evil, you're filthy, you're disgusting, how's that going to affect your mental health over time? If you live in a society that tells you, no, you're a man, you were born a man, and you will die a man, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you do, we'll put you into jail or worse. If you live in a society like that, but your internal identity screams woman, I am a woman, and I don't suppose that you would be able to sympathise with that, Richard, because you've been born a man and lived your life a man. So, yeah, people that are of different gender, romantic and sexual identities and minorities, they are going to be more likely to be affected by mental health issues if the society treats them that way. And it's exactly the same with people of different races. If people of different races live in societies that don't welcome that race and are prejudiced against that race, they'll be more susceptible to all of these horrible things as well. And that is where the evidence lies.
Right, that's a different issue. If you look at this,
it's the exact same issue because race is a social construct also. And you know it is.
Race is a social construct. Can we come back to that one?
We can address it, right? No, but it's an important one to address, because if you can admit that race is a social construct, then that kind of obliterates the whole argument that you've got on your side.
Right, we'll come back to that. Let's need to answer this point. In terms of the negative outcomes, I mean, youth, it's, again, if you do government reports, etc., youth mental health is becoming a more and more serious problem. And in terms of your theory that it's discrimination and hostility that causes these mental health problems. So if you've got a man who decides he's going to try and live as a woman and base his life on being a woman, I believe that the mental health problems associated with that are, there's two sources. One is the belief that he is a woman is in itself a mental health issue. And then going forward, trying to live your life on the basis of something's true, that's not true, is inevitably going to lead to ongoing tensions, and it's not going to be positive in various ways. So that's what's caused it. Now, if your theory that it's to do with discrimination, then what we should have seen in that case is you would look at different countries, and the countries that are most sort of enlightened in your view, most liberal in their policies, you'd expect to see these problems dramatically reducing. But that's not the case. That's not the case.
It absolutely is the case. It really is the case. And you can even see it. You can even see it in America, the United States of America. You have states that, and well, certain regions in certain states that are still highly prejudiced against gay people. And the people that live in those areas, yeah, they're going to have a much rougher time. And if you have a pretty hard life, it is going to affect your mental health. You know that's the case.
Let's put it this way then. You agree with me?
Can I just?
Yeah. Okay.
I'll agree with you that no. So I'll go back to my point that countries like the Netherlands, states like Vermont that have welcomed gay people, for much longer periods of time, and it's just been a normal thing. There are families there that are gay parents. The kids are getting on great. The parents are getting on great, and there's no mental health issues that will develop unless it's something that's genetic or biological, in which case there's no real way of coming back from that. But if we can...
So where are we in Scotland then?
We can offset... Sorry?
Right, where are we in Scotland then on that spectrum? Is Scotland a place where this discrimination is minimal, so the problems are minimised?
So I'd say so, because I work with non-binary people, I work with trans people, and they've been able to live their lives. They've been able to live their lives openly, freely, happily, with little to no discrimination. And if they have been able to live like that, then yeah, their mental health is generally going to be better. But the fact that you're stating that having a different gender identity internally is in itself a mental health issue, then I would really ask you to back up your sources on that, because that's a really wild claim and it doesn't comport with the science at all.
Right. The Scottish LGBT campaigning groups are forever putting out reports about the negative outcomes associated with the people with which they're dealing. So they're continuing. So you're saying Scotland's very well. It says back in my point. Hang on. So Scotland's become more and more progressive and open-minded, or however you want to put it. These problems are persisting. They don't go away. They're inherent. So if someone is, of the belief that they're actually a different sex or gender or whatever you want to call it, and they're trying to live their life that way, I believe that it's inevitable that trying to live your life on the basis that something that isn't really true, and then that's going to lead to a lot of problems. And if you say, look at what the LGBT groups say, that is what the outcome that we find in Scotland. Now the other thing is, you were saying earlier on that you acknowledged that we're talking about transgender, non-binary in particular. I mean, there are negative outcomes associated with it. Another definite result of the culture in Scotland is that there is an increase in the number of people identifying as transgender and non-binary. So if there's problems associated with this, and the current culture is leading more and more people down that path, is that not just inevitably going to lead to more of these negative outcomes?
I'm still struggling for you to tell me what problems people who have been able to live their lives as they see fit and as they feel, what problems is that causing? You've just said that the LGBT groups put out these things, but you haven't been very clear at all. So I've got nothing to go on here. If you can tell me,
suicide rates is the normal one that's commonly quoted, isn't it? I mean, suicide rates among people identifying as transgender are sadly very, very elevated.
Well, we've still got a long way to go for trans acceptance. So until we see complete and clear trans acceptance, then yeah, we'll still expect there to be an elevated rate of suicide in trans people. It's the same with non-binary people. We've got pretty good gay acceptance in Scotland. I would say we're pretty much there. Gay people can live their lives just fine. and that's fantastic. And now we see the results of that is that young gay people, they don't have the same kind of problems that maybe the generation before them did. And certainly much less of the problems that the generation before them did, because we've moved over. Society has changed to welcome gay people. And
do you agree, though, that the number of people identifying as non-binary and transgender is increasing? Do you agree with that?
I don't have any sources to say what the numbers are, but I would say so. Yeah, I would say more people are starting to feel more comfortable about coming out. Yeah.
So you're admitting that there's
agreeing.
negative associations with this, and an increasing number of people are going down that road.
Whatever
the cause is, that's something to be worried about, isn't it? That's a negative thing.
I'm not agreeing that somebody coming out and living their life openly and freely causes problems. I am not agreeing that. I am disagreeing that point until I'm blue in the teeth here, Richard, because it's just not the case. And you know it's not the case. What problems does it cause if somebody is able to live their life, come out to their friends and family, everybody's happy for them, just accepts them for who they are, the society around them accepts them for who they are? What problems can and does that cause?
We're talking about trans and non-binary in particular. Well, the evidence is that it causes. Okay. Well, the evidence is that it causes all the problems we've talked about. I mean, that's just the fact.
So I've looked into this, Richard. I've done my research here, and I still cannot find. I'm looking for reasons. I looked for reasons for you to disagree with me, and I looked at the science behind it. I looked at everything. Does acceptance of trans and non-binary people lead to an increase in anything? No, there's no significant data to suggest that it does. So I would love for you.
It's obviously the case.
How is it obviously the case?
It's obviously the case in a country like Scotland that as this philosophy has become more and more prominent, then more and more people are adopting, like unorthodox gender identities. I mean, surely that's not controversial, is it?
I wouldn't say that's controversial, but then we're going to link into you saying that living your life out causes problems. And that's where I disagree with you. And I think that's where anybody that lives their life out would disagree with you.
It's the fact, if you look at, say, outcomes for LGBT people in general, as I won't keep repeating myself, but just the fact, that's why the NHS has special pages related to issues related to these groups. That's why the campaigning groups are forever elucidating the list of negative outcomes associated with them in order to try and tackle them. They talk about health inequalities endlessly. Just to move on from that, though, I feel we've dealt with that. Race is a social construct.
Yeah.
That's interesting. What do you mean by that?
So, I'm very interested in kind of like the history of America, particularly the Black history of America, because it's an absolute horror story. And you had these negative depictions of Black people in the media. You had these over-sexualized images of men, Black men, taking white women away, and you had these negative perceptions of these nasty, evil creatures that they didn't view as human. So they thought, yeah, it's okay, let's round them up and string them up and burn them in public and not have any shame about it, posing it to them for postcards. So yeah, race is a social construct in the sense that apart from physical, superficial differences in maybe the way that our faces appear and the way that our hair is and the color of our skin, then that's it. It's just superficial differences. And if you can tell me what's different between a Black African man and a white Scottish man, apart from the superficial differences, and apart from the way that they talk, and apart from maybe some cultural beliefs and things, can you please tell me what's different about those people?
And again, this is an ideology that's trying to redefine well-established words. I mean, I think the differences between races are exactly those things you just described. I mean, that's what race means. So what you're trying to do, is to redefine race to mean something other than what the word actually means. Race refers to what are basically genetic differences. Different races are different genetic groups within the human species. And what you talked about was like social, assumptions or cultural assumptions, whatever, that might have developed about races, but that's not race itself. So it's the same thing. It's the same mistake I believe you made with gender identity. So you're taking some social social attachments, if you like, and calling those the fundamental physical reality when they're not. I say race is fundamentally a genetic thing. Different racial groups are determined by their genes. That's just a fact.
So, right, let's hit that one out the park, because let's go the genetic difference between Chinese people and Korean people. How much difference is there genetically? Because they are, by your definition, different races, different countries, different cultures, different everything else. What's the genetic
hang
difference?
on, why are they different races by my definition?
What? Yes, okay, so let's take it further afield. What Koreans and Mongolians, what's the difference in their race? What's the genetic difference in their race? Because it is minimal, the genetic difference.
I haven't said there are different races. I'm not claiming there are different races.
Okay, right. So let's go from Mongolia to Afghanistan. Are they different races?
There's different ways. If you take the entire population of the world and take gene samples from around the planet, if you put them into a computer basically to analyze that and say divide them into a certain number of groups, then they can do that. I mean, the common groups would be like the Negroid, Caucasoid, what's the other one called? The sort of Asian. Can't remember the name for that. So yeah, anyway, so these fundamental groups are determined by genes. But what's the problem with that? Why are you so determined to just deny the scientific reality? I don't understand.
So that's showing up there. Yeah. So Mongoloid, Caucasian, and
Mongoloid. That's it. Right. Yeah, Negroid, Caucasian, Mongoloid.
Right. Okay, right. So let's go in between Caucasian and Mongoloid. You have Afghanistan. Let's go between Caucasian and I'm not even going to say that word. I'm not going to try and rock that boat. But let's go for black. We'll say black African. All right. You go in between these two. You've got Egypt. Okay. So race can go in between these three key races of humans, and we have different countries, different cultures. But then you've missed out another one entirely, because you've got black, yellow, and white. There's an awful lot of brown people in the world as well.
So your spectrum there.
So we could divide this down further and further, and just realize that
on what basis could you divide it down?
On the basis of these societies. Okay, so let's say Algeria and then Nigeria, and then we'll say, okay, they're different countries. How much of the African genes do they have in them? How much of the Caucasian genes do they have in them?
Yeah.
And then they would have a tiny little bit of a difference between the two of them. And then you go through, you take black people from South Africa, and then you look at their genetics, and they're going to be even closer to here, because there has been some Caucasian breeding in the further South Africa you go. And that's it. And the more open we have a world in terms of travel, then the more that different races will interbreed. And then you've got people that are mixed race, and then that's the way it's going to keep going. And then you'll get to a point where everybody's pretty much the same color, because we've been mixing.
I don't see any connection between that. I don't see any connection between that and your claim that race is a social. You haven't heard my question. I don't see any connection between what you're saying and your claim that race is a social construct.
So we had those four types of humans: white, brown, yellow, black. But in between that, you say that these are different genetic races, okay? Which isn't even a thing to begin with. But okay, we'll go with that for the sake of argument. We're all the same species. We can all interbreed with each other. Doesn't matter where we're from. If we're fertile, we can interbreed with each other. So we're the same species, and the differences are nothing but superficial. And race is a construct that humans have made because we are a kind of tribal social species.
Okay.
And so the less tribal we become and the more open world we become, the less that we're going to view race as a thing that affects anything. And the less that we view race as a factor that affects anything, then the less racism there's going to be, the less need there's going to be for this thing called race.
So if people hadn't invented race, I would be the same race as a black African. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because there wouldn't be a thing called race. You would be human.
Right. But he still would have significant genetic differences.
Superficial genetic differences.
How superficial or not? That's an irrelevant point. That's not important.
No, it's not irrelevant at all, because if they are genetically similar enough to breed, then they're very, very, very close genetically. And any genetic differences are nothing but superficial.
Different species. Saying it's a different race. That's always been the definition of race. That's what race means.
Right. Okay. That's always been the definition of race, and I'm stating my argument that concept itself is completely flawed. Okay, we've had this thing called race for as long as humans have been a thing, because we've had to have a way to differentiate between the tribes. And then as the tribes got bigger, we had to have a way to differentiate between the countries. And then we had to have a way to differentiate between the continents. And then now we all live on this one big planet. What use is race? It doesn't have a use. The only use something like race has is negative, because you're labeling people differently just based on their appearance. And that's
we're talking about
superficial differences.
We're talking about genetic facts here. So arguments about what use is it isn't helpful at all. It's just a fact that there are, it doesn't matter how deep or superficial, it doesn't matter. There are genetic differences between people who've, ancestry is in different parts of the world. Now, in terms of how someone wants to divide that up, how many races, if they want to say this race is different than that, but as a basic concept, it's a very useful one, because it can be used to describe an obvious feature of the world, and that humans come in different races. That's the whole point. Now, I believe where you're coming from is the idea that the world would be a better place if there was no such thing as race, and so you're trying to pretend that there actually is no such thing as it, because you think that's morally virtuous. Whereas I'm saying believing the facts of the matter is morally neutral.
So going back to the facts of the matter, that there are different races, and having different races is somehow useful. Okay, what about somebody from Sweden that has a child with somebody from Nigeria? What race is their child? Is that child African, or is that child European?
It's not difficult. That's what we call mixed race, or you could just describe the...
Right. So then if that child then has a child with somebody whose parents are of another mixed, other different heritage, let's say one's from Pakistan and one's from China, then they're going to have another different mixed race baby. They have a baby. What race is that baby going to be? It's a bit like
to say there's no such thing as colour, because you can mix them together.
I'm not.
Yeah, there's no such thing as red, because what if you mix red with blue? You see?
No.
What if you mix that?
No, because you keep going back to objects that we have clear definitions for. Okay, and these are objects, cars, colours. These are objective things. And I'm saying that race is subjective, for the point that I've just proven to you by saying right, we're here to debate non-binary and trans. So if we could drop the race thing, because you're not going to agree with me that race is a social construct. You think that it's necessary and useful, and it's only useful to differentiate between the races.
What I'm saying,
that's the only use it has.
What I'm saying is the question of whether it's necessary or useful is irrelevant when we're talking about just a scientific fact based on genetic differences between different members of the human race. Those differences are a fact. Because if you want to identify someone's race, to some degree, you might be able to look at them, but you can also do it by looking at people's genes as well. So that's just a scientific fact. And the fact that you keep coming back at it from the point of view of what's useful and helpful, I think indicates to me that you're driven by what you think is a sort of moral imperative and you think actually admitting the facts of the matter is somehow harmful, and it's something you're keen to avoid. But I think it just doesn't work though, because no matter how good your motive, to try and deny a truth isn't the way forward to deal with any sort of issue.
So again, I think that your basis for thinking that race is something that exists is flawed, because it's just something that we use to differentiate between people, and that's it. That's the only thing it's got. We've got Kwejo, and he's from Nigeria. We know that Kwejo's from Nigeria because of the way he looks and the way he talks. Okay,
and his genes.
But that's useful how? Because genetically, Kwejo could have a child with Sandra. I keep saying, I don't care how useful it is.
I don't care how useful a concept
You don't care
is.
how useful it is, but it exists. And it exists because you're able to divide the groups of people up so that you can differentiate between them. Okay, I agree with you then. Got you.
Well, it exists because genetic analysis demonstrates that there's different groups. I mean, there's nothing sinister about it. There are different sort of patterns of genes in people who originate from different parts of the world. I mean, what's the problem?
I'm telling you that the problem is that if you trace human evolution back, and I don't know what your stance on evolution is, but if you trace human evolution back, then all of the genetic evidence states that the human species originated from Africa. And we could trace genetics and we could trace the genomes and see exactly how humans moved across the planet over thousands and thousands of years to get to the places where they are now, so that you have groups of people that have Mongoloid features, and then you have the groups of people that have black features, and you have groups of people that have white features. And then that's how we've got the 4 kind of main groups, because of the way that humans weren't able to travel. And now we are able to travel and go to other countries. I could see in maybe 10, 20 generations time that there's not going to be much in the difference of people races, and therefore race won't be a thing, and race will be something that is viewed as being that we had in the past to differentiate between people. And here's the problems that it caused, because all it has done is
you see, you switched. You started talking about the evolutionary account of the origin of humanity, the origin of different races. So you were talking about factual matters. Then you switched again to what you thought would be useful, or what will be helpful, and what would be better.
No.
I'm stating
the case. Yes, so race is irrelevant. Then we can agree that race is irrelevant and move on from that. Yeah.
No, I don't.
Race is relevant. Race is relevant.
Well, it's relevant in some aspect. I mean, it's just factual.
In what aspects? In what aspects is race relevant?
It's quite helpful in identifying. Let's say a crime is committed, and you want to describe the person to the police. Then describing your sort of racial characteristics can be a helpful way to do that.
So describing the color of the skin. Describing the color of the skin can be useful. Describing the color of hair that they have. So if you say he's a white man, okay, what color of hair does he have? You say he's a black man, they're probably not going to ask what kind of hair he's got, because they're going to make assumptions that he's got afro hair. Yeah. And then if you say he was Asian, what kind of Asian? Was he brown or was he yellow? Okay. So that's helpful in identifying the initials, but then you've got to go down the specifics. And that's why I'm saying race is just superficial. Okay, race is helpful in identifying criminal suspects. That's had problems in the past, and you know it. So that's, again, proves my point that race is a harmful construct.
So I think what we've got so far, we've got 2 cases where you deny the obvious factual truth for what you think are moral reasons. So the idea that there's male and female, you sort of deny that because you think that there are moral reasons to not accept that. And now with the facts of race, again, you think there are moral reasons not to accept the straightforward facts.
Yeah, because
race.
I'm saying, Richard, society is moving on. Society is evolving to say, okay, maybe we need to look at things a little bit differently. And you have a problem with that.
Can you not see how you keep changing from facts to values? The values don't change the facts.
Right. Okay, so you're saying that race has value, race is useful. We'll move on from that, because I don't think we're going to get anywhere from that.
I'm just saying it's a fact. Just saying it's a fact.
Okay, right. Okay, race is a fact. Race exists. Okay, race has value and it is necessary, and we have it for a reason. Okay,
but you keep adding on the other things to it. It's like you can't separate them.
Okay. What? Not at all. I've stayed on point. What am I adding on? I'm saying to you that race. I believe that race is a social construct. Anybody that's an anthropologist will agree that race is a social construct. It's completely useless, and we should move on from it, because now we're starting to see much more of a mixture of people, and we're seeing all sorts of mixed races. Okay, let's move on. Let's just move on from that aspect of the past, because it's useful and it caused problems. That's my point. That is what I'm sticking to. And if you don't agree with that, then we'll move on.
We can certainly move on. I've said my piece there. Right, let's go back to the non-binary things. How about the conversion therapy ban? I mean, that's a hot topic at the moment.
100% on the conversion therapy ban, because it's harmful. And the way that you framed it saying that people who think that being non-binary doesn't make any sense will be inhibited from trying to help people who choose to live as non-binary. So somebody chooses to live as non-binary. If they don't feel comfortable about that, then they have every right to go and seek help in whatever way they see fit. And
no, but they haven't. That's the whole point of the conversion therapy ban.
The whole point of it, right? So why would somebody want to convert?
Well,
why would somebody want conversion therapy?
The conversion therapy ban targets.
No. Why would somebody want conversion therapy in the first place?
I just started explaining to you. The type of thing it targets would be the person. Let's say there's someone I've had this conversation with someone who said, they experience transgender feelings, they experience a desire to dress up and live as a woman, but they really don't want to do that. They think that's a blight on their life. It's not a road they want to go down, and they want some help to help them to turn away from that, to try and put that to one side, and to live as the man that they want to be. Right, a person like that, I believe, has got every right to find a counselor or any sort of informal support or whatever from someone who agrees with them, says, yeah, okay, I'll help you on that, and they receive exactly the help that they want. Now, the conversion therapy ban is about banning that sort of support. Why should that be banned?
So, right, that case that you mentioned, somebody like that. Those cases are incredibly rare. Somebody that has been assigned a gender at birth, but has a different gender identity, but then wants to stay in the gender that they are. The only reason I could fathom is because of societal pressures. If they don't want to live like that, then they don't have to live like that. And they can say, right, I've had these feelings and thoughts. That's not conversion therapy. That's something completely different. Conversion therapy.
It is.
No,
that's
okay,
exactly what meets the definition of the bill.
Okay, so can you tell me what conversion therapy is and how it's applied?
Yeah, well, by the definition of the Scottish Government, yes, I can tell you.
I know, and I'm not by the definition of the Scottish Government, because I know what you're going to go down, but let's have what somebody is asking what conversion therapy is. What is it?
Well, there's not an internationally agreed definition. So if we try and just come up with something ourselves, that's not probably very helpful. If we're going to talk about the issue, we're best to talk about it in the light of the Scottish Government's definition, I suggest.
Cool. Okay. Yep.
So the Scottish Government's definition is there's two forms of acts. One is offering some sort of service to people. The other one is to engage in some sort of what they class as coercive behavior. So it can be either of those. And then it has to be sort of provided or whatever to an individual. It has to have the intention of changing or suppressing their sexuality, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And it has to cause some harm. That's their definition of it. Now, just to clarify with change or suppress, so suppress could include someone who says, for example, I'm a married man, with wife and children. I'm experiencing same-sex attraction to other men. I don't want to leave my family. I want these feelings to go away. Can you help me, to put those feelings aside and to stay committed to my family? Then the Scottish Government would say it would be illegal for someone to help you in the pursuit of that goal. That would make the person into a criminal if they were helped.
No, it wouldn't. It would make the person that's given the service the criminal.
That's what I mean. Yeah, the person who helped.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the person who helped, that would make them a criminal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I disagree with you. I disagreed with you from the start. The last time we spoke about this, I disagreed with you, and the time before, this time, I'm disagreeing with you again. That conversion therapy is not that. That's something completely different. Conversion therapy is something that's set up in order to change or redefine somebody's sexuality. That can't happen. It doesn't exist. Any psychologist will tell you that. But it does happen. Won't change.
It does happen. I've heard lots of people telling me the story of how that's happened to them. So the Scottish Government, there's people in Scotland I know who would say, I used to be gay, now I'm not. Maybe they're married, got a wife and kids or whatever. And the Scottish Government says to them, you're a liar. We don't believe your story. You're imagining it. You made it up or something, which I think is totally outrageous, because there are plenty of people who've been on that journey.
So, right. When you said the Scottish Government said that lies. That somebody that's said they used to be gay, but then they changed and now they have married with a wife and kids.
Yeah.
That person is being called a liar by the Scottish government.
Effectively, yeah.
Effectively or really?
Well, it's because the Scottish government says that you cannot change sexuality. It cannot happen. So there's no point trying. There's no point trying to help anyone do that because it is impossible. And there are lots of people who say, "Well, that's something I wanted to do, I aimed to do, and it happened. It did happen." Now, I'm not saying that what percentage is successful.
Well,
but for some people, they are successful.
Happens, then right, okay. So what I disagree with about conversion therapy is parents sending their kids to conversion therapy because they don't want the kid to be gay. Or that's absolutely horrendous. That kid has to wait till they're an adult to make their own decisions. The parents have no right to do that to the child.
What is conversion therapy that you're imagining there? What are you imagining?
I'm not imagining. I'm on about these places that have existed. And maybe in some places do, but certainly I really, really hope not because they're horrendous.
But it doesn't exist in Scotland.
And not in Scotland, and thank God. Yeah, thank the people that have banned it. Thank God. Yeah. Because
so what happens with this issue?
It's horrific and horrendous. And look, what happens with this issue is that people kill themselves, Richard. People that go into these therapy places, they kill themselves. Their suicide rate is sky high. You look at the evidence, that's why it needs to be banned. Because people sending their kids there because they don't agree with it. Screw the parents. It's not their decision. It's the child.
Whoa. Let's just get that clip, shall we? You just said screw the parents. Excuse me?
Yep.
Excuse me?
If any parent feels that they have to force their child to be different, then that child should be taken into care.
These are the people who love that child most and care for them the most and are doing everything in their power to try and help them. And you say, screw the parents. How dare you? How dare you?
Fair enough. Fair enough. If you want to say how dare I know a lot of people that would agree with me. Because the parent has no right to tell that child you are not what you think and say you are. The parent has the right to say all the parent can do in that circumstance is wait till you turn 18, make your own decisions. On your head be it'll have nothing more to do with you. That's all the parent can do. But if the parent wants to accept them and love them for who they are,
what a parent can do is bring up their children in accordance with their own beliefs and values. And that might involve in some situations, so saying, let's say a child is talking about changing gender, whatever, that might involve saying to that child, we think this is a bad move. We think you should reconsider this. These are the reasons why you should reconsider. And I think that's absolutely fine to do that. Yep. Whereas, I mean, what you were saying, the Green Party, I mean, there was a Green councillor on Twitter today saying basically exactly the same as you were saying, stuff the parents. Why do they think they should have any say in the way their children are brought up? Or in the guidance. Hang on. And I've talked earlier on that there are pretty serious negative consequences associated with going down these paths, and it's perfectly reasonable for parents to question and to try and guide their children with regard to these issues. Now, the Scottish government shares your opinion that basically parents can give any guidance they like as long as it's the guidance that the Scottish government approves of. That's what it amounts to. That's one of the reasons why this is so insidious. And you talk about people committing suicide. The thing is with this so-called research, these so-called facts, is it's driven by activists. You get people who are LGBT campaigners, and it's in their interest to tell the most horrific story they can about, the effect that this had on them. But there is plenty of research, peer-reviewed research out there that shows positive effects. It shows people, in general, it's been a positive thing in their life. And it also shows as well effects for a very substantial number of people that their sexual orientation or gender identity can shift. And that was what they wanted. So that's a good thing.
So, okay. If a parent wants to give a child advice and say, this is why I think that this is a bad decision, this is why I think this is a bad life choice, then, okay, fair enough, they can advise that child. But on what basis are they saying that? Are they saying that because I don't think that transgender is a thing, or that I think it's immoral, I think it's wrong? If
It
they're
could be
basing that on
any of the above. Any of the above.
okay, any of the above, and uh, they have every right to say that to the child and have that discussion. What they don't have the right to do is to punish that child, is to send that child off to somewhere against their will to be converted and be told these feelings
But
that you have are
that's the
immoral,
phantom, though.
they're wrong,
That doesn't
and they're
exist.
wrong.
That doesn't. That's not what the
Okay,
bill
so
is going to target. That doesn't happen in Scotland. The bill is
yeah,
going to
good.
target just people offering support to people who ask for it, parents guiding their own children, etc. That's what it's designed to clamp down on. So
Okay,
there's
well,
a disconnect. There's a
right, okay.
disconnect
So
between the sort of demonized view of electric shock therapy and kids being dragged off to camps or whatever, which is basically fiction, and then that's used to bring it under the cover that they smuggle in the ban on basically the counselling that some people really need and really want and seek out, and the Scottish government wants to make it illegal for them to find the counselling that they want.
Right, I'm not political at all. I don't care for the Scottish government. I don't care about the SNP. Right, if I'll vote based on policy. If the policy fits, that's how I'll vote. I don't have any specific tie to any party. I've got my moral code, which is based on the less harm caused, the better. I've got a philosophy that is, I'll believe things when I know them to be true. And I know I'll find out and believe something if I could find out the facts to back it up. That is why I flat out refuse to believe that conversion therapy in any form is beneficial, because it just isn't a benefit. If somebody has a social situation where it's not conducive to be gay or to be trans, then that's the social situation that they're in. Then
I recommend this book. This book, it's very helpful.
Banning conversion therapy.
Talks about a lot of the evidence of positive effects from so-called conversion therapy. You said basically, not doing harm. The problem with basing your morality on just not doing harm is that it's very difficult to work out the consequences of a particular action in the longer term. And also people tend to be very biased in the way they assess the harms that might result from a particular action. So each individual trying to work out for themselves the consequences of their action through, from 5 minutes time through future generations, the result of that tends to be very permissive moral standards. And so it basically doesn't work, which is why we need a more structured and broad moral code to live by in order to have a healthy society. Okay,
right. So if I can just go to a little bit of testimony that I've actually got here, if I could, it won't take me a minute. And this is from somebody that I know very, very well. Mm-hmm. I lived in a family who had strict gender norms, strict gender definitions. I wanted to dress the way I wanted to dress. I felt the way I felt. Can't read my own writing. Yeah, I wore nail polish, I wore makeup sometimes, and that was quickly beaten out of me. Through that, I tried to live my life the best I can as a man. I got myself into situations, getting into fights, going into dangerous sports, trying to prove what a hard man that I am. However, I've realised over the past few years that that's not who I am. I'm now much happier and freer, living as a non-binary person. My family, my partner, all accept me and love me for who I am. My mental health has improved. I'm free to express myself. I can dress the way I like, and I don't care what anybody thinks about me anymore. I'm much happier and much more free.
Okay, let's go back to the state.
So can you tell me what's wrong with somebody identifying as non-binary if it has a positive influence on their life?
If you think about that story there's the stage where the person did you say something like try to act like a boy or a man, so got into fights and things, which is obviously not a very helpful path to go down. Might it have been better if that person could have sought out some support and counseling at that point that might have helped them to go about fulfilling their wishes at that point in a more productive way?
So they said to me, I did say, did you ever have counseling or anything growing up? And it was for mental health issues that was genetic. He suffers from chronic depression, which is something that is genetic. It's not it's just a biological thing. It does nothing to do with anything the way you're brought up. He went to counselling for that. And back then, when he had the counselling, when he was a boy, the non-binary wasn't anything that was ever heard of. It wasn't spoken about. Although there were plenty of people that lived like that, there just wasn't that kind of label for it. It was gender bender or tranny or something like that. And it was always met with a kind of a derogatory kind of sense. And you and I are old enough to remember those days when, you know, we could all have a laugh at the tranny on the telly and the man dressing up as a woman. Oh, haha, very, very funny. But the fact is, now that he's been able to live the life the way that he wants to and can express himself the way he wants to, he still refers to himself as a man. He still identifies as he, but he knows in his internal identity that he is non-binary. And nothing that anybody can say to him is going to change that.
See,
and it's the same with every other non-binary person.
So your statement that he knows is non-binary, you state that as though as though he knows a fact. But the thing is, by your definition, if you think you're non-binary, you are non-binary. So to think you are and to know you are the same thing on your definition. But I would say for someone going down like that, I would say even if a person at some point they're thinking, this is going really well, that this is, I feel better now I'm doing this. I would say in the long term, that is not likely to be a positive life choice in the long term.
Okay.
And I think the evidence bears that out very strongly.
So I work with a trans woman. She transitioned in the late 70s. She has been living as a woman for the past 50 years. Mm-hmm. I had no idea until she told me. I told her I was doing this today, and she told me. I had no clue.
Uh-huh.
So she's had a great life. She's been able to live the way that she wants to. She moved from Birmingham or Brighton, one of the English B places. She moved up, I think it was Birmingham actually, because Brighton's quite friendly to those types of people. And she moved up to Scotland, and as soon she introduced herself as her name, and nobody had any clue that she was transgender. And
that form of argument is, it's like saying, my friend smokes 60 a day and he's fine. It's that sort of argument.
But then you've brought up an argument of somebody that you knew that was gay, that was married to a woman, and for them to go and seek out conversion therapy, that would now be illegal. So if you can bring in personal testimony, then I can bring in personal testimony.
I know there's a difference in the way I'm using it. A different way of using it. I was using that because the Scottish government is saying no one has that experience. It's impossible. So in order to refute that, I need to just cite one example to show that's not true. Now, when it comes to like non-binary transgender paths being in general negative for people who go down them, that's not a matter of single stories. And also people's life stories are obviously not finished until they're finished. So if you look at the general picture, then we need to look at the statistics, and individual sort of anecdotes are not really, are not effective in that argument.
Okay, so you're trying to tell me that every single non-binary and trans person that is able to live their life freely and happily and openly, of which there are millions throughout the world, and you're trying to tell me that that is a problem, that they are going to inevitably go down a route where they go, oh, I made a bad decision then. I'm actually not Jackie, I'm Jack.
I didn't say anything's going to happen to every one of them. And the negative outcome might not be, a change in gender identity. It's more likely to be the other negative outcomes associated with people who go down these roads.
So how would you argue if a non-binary person came on your show, then how would you argue to them that they are not what they are?
I would argue that, see, that's a pointless question, because the definition of gender identity is it's whatever you feel you are. Okay, so once that's your definition, there can be no logical argument about it. What I would say is the whole concept of gender identity is unhelpful, because it presents people with the opportunity of adopting a gender identity that's different than their sex, which effectively becomes a delusion, because these things, it's like the male woman, the female man. It does amount to trying to live life based on something that's not true, and therefore inevitably, in general, it tends to have problematic outcomes.
It's not true based on their biological sex, but it is true based on their internal gender identity. So
but the whole I don't accept the whole concept of gender identity. There's no point trying to decide if it's true or not, because it's entirely subjective. I just think the whole concept is unhelpful. I think it's damaging to people. It's confusing and damaging.
It's confusing and damaging to people that don't get it, but to everybody else, they're fine with it.
Now, again, the suggestion that, like, I'm sort of not clever enough to understand it. I fully understand it.
I'm not saying that you're not clever enough to understand it. I'm saying you don't want to understand it. You don't want to get it, because then that would mean that you are in some way accepting people that are trans and non-binary. That you'd want to be so far away from that.
I do understand the concept. Right? I understand what you believe.
Yeah.
I understand what you believe gender identity is, and I understand the general understanding of that term in society. And there's no point trying to argue that it's wrong, because it's not based on anything factual. What I'm arguing is that the whole concept of having a gender identity that is your identity, that's different from your biological sex, I think that concept is unhelpful and dangerous. That's what I believe.
To who?
To unhelpful and dangerous to who? To the people who adopt those identities and go down those paths. But time has marched on.
Okay. Well, I'll see how things turn out for me in a few years, Richard, because I came out as non-binary 3 years ago, and my life has been fantastic. That story was my story that I told you, so twist at the end.
Yeah, as I say, my uncle Fred smoked 90 a day, and he got run over a bus when he was 92.
Completely irrelevant.
The statistics that matter,
that's fine.
Not the anecdotes. So. Anyway, thank you very much, Brian, for coming on. Right, commenters, I'm sorry for not having the chance to bring in your comments. I was quite engrossed in our debate, but thanks for all the comments that were on there. So I hope you find that interesting. Brian, thanks for coming on. I say Scotland is almost a debate desert, but sometimes people are willing to come on and have a chat. So Brian, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
That's fine. No problem, Richard. Thank you.
Right, thanks for it. Right, good night.
Bye-bye.